Signal Sciences secures the most important web applications, APIs, and microservices of the world's leading companies, protecting over 7,500 applications and 150 billion production requests per week. Signal Sciences Next-Gen WAF and RASP help companies increase security and maintain site reliability without sacrificing velocity, all at the lowest total cost of ownership. Signal Sciences' patented technology protects any application against any attack, with integrations into any DevOps toolchain. Signal Sciences, demand more from your WAF. Learn more at signalsciences.com/PSW. Let the team at Black Hills Information Security test your defenses. With over 10 years of experience in penetration testing, red teaming, and threat hunting, the testers at Black Hills will help you find the holes in your security before the bad guys do. The team at Black Hills cares about educating and sharing their knowledge by creating countless blogs, open source tools, and webcasts for you to learn more about the tradecraft of pen testing and red teaming. Visit securityweekly.com/BHIS to join their mailing list and view the latest blogs and webcasts from Black Hills Information Security. The greatest threat to businesses today isn't the outsider trying to get in. It's the people you trust, the ones who already have the keys, your employees, contractors, and privileged users. 60% of online attacks are carried out by insiders. To stop these insider threats, you need to see what users are doing before an incident occurs. Observe It enables security teams to detect risky user activity, investigate incidents in minutes, and effectively respond. Get your free trial at observeit.com/securityweekly. Welcome back, everyone, to Enterprise Security Weekly. Mark your calendars for tomorrow, actually, for our holiday extravaganza. We will be recording, is it 7 segments? Seven segments total. Let's see, 6 of which are roundtable discussions.
At a rectangular table.
At a rectangular table, yes. The very same table we're sitting at now, which is where we're testing out the equipment, getting ready for tomorrow, which is why you see a slightly different set for those video viewers out there. But we'll be covering topics like red team, blue team, security versus compliance, security history, application security, Holiday Hack Challenge, our yearly tradition with Mr. Ed Scotus, and much more. Hacker Culture will be the final one when we've been drinking pretty much all day. As we've been known to do. So the last segment's going to be really interesting, I think.
Entertaining.
At least for us. We sound better to you when we're drunk. Drunk, funny, and interesting. Something like that. In any case. Let's see, Matt, this is your segment on unifying DevOps and SecOps.
Yeah, so how
security without friction.
Security without friction. Well, how this started was we were putting together our content plan for next year, and you had a number of items on here around containers and application security and all this other stuff. And look, everybody's heard this concept of DevSecOps, and there's lots of articles out about DevSecOps and all this fun stuff, and it's like, wait a minute, but how many people are actually doing DevSecOps? What does it mean? And so this is a presentation I've done.
They fight over DevSecOps or SecDevOps.
Oh, it will never be SecDevOps. I'm just going to tell you right now, security folks, you will never get SecDevOps. Just not going to happen. And so what I'm going to do is, this is a streamlined presentation that I've given a couple times at RSA conference and some of the other places. And I've integrated in some different points in the CI/CD process where you can check. But so let's start with some basics, right? So to me, the first thing is what I think security professionals have to understand is that DevOps is driving digital transformation. And the reason I say this is because the business has gone to the developers and said, look, we need to get in front of our customers. We need to engage our customers. We need mobile apps. We need better websites. We need better interaction. And so developers have been given a lot of the capabilities to go out and build code. And DevOps is this mechanism that's used to drive this digital transformation. And so if you're a security professional and you're thinking, this DevOps thing is a fad, the answer is no, it's not really a fad. It's going to continue to affect you. And so how do you embrace DevOps is going to be one of the things we talk about, and where does security fit in that DevOps, that process. But digital transformation is about the application, and I talk about this a lot because the research we were doing at Tenable in late 2015 really saw kind of the future of where technology was going to go. A lot of the things that we do is focused around the application, whether it's the web app, the mobile app. It is engagement with these things that sit in our pockets every single day, allowing people to interact with companies. And so application security plays a very important role in the future from an InfoSec perspective. I might go cloud, I might not go cloud. I might keep my data center, I might not keep my data center. But here's what I'm going to tell you that's going to stick throughout. Applications, users accessing those applications, and the data behind those applications will transform regardless of how we deploy these technologies in the future. The other thing is continuous delivery mechanisms in the DevOps process, what's known as the CI/CD pipeline, is going to accelerate deployment. And this is an important thing I'm going to talk about when we talk about some of the people challenges. The frequency of change in DevOps is crazy fast. Now, I used to ask this question when I give this presentation to folks, say, well, how often do you scan your network? Monthly? Quarterly? Do you scan it weekly? Do you scan it daily? Do you scan it multiple times a day? And the reason I say that is because frequency here in the DevOps process is potentially multiple times a day. And sometimes as security practitioners, we're not ready for that many changes in the environment to address the security concerns. And so the continuous delivery side of this is going to accelerate deployment. It's going to accelerate change, things that we have to deal with. And obviously the last one is infrastructure is going to be anywhere and everywhere. I'm going to have hybrid environments. I'm going to have multi-cloud environments. I'm going to have infrastructure all around the world. I'm going to have users all around the world. People who interact with my applications are going to be anywhere and everywhere. And that creates, I think, a lot of challenges for security professionals who are used to protecting a perimeter, protecting assets within a perimeter. Those assets have gone beyond the perimeter. And this is going to be a challenge for security professionals, I think, as we continue to transform through this process. And how do you address all these aspects? This is why you see so much attention on zero trust, for example. This concept that you can't trust anything because of where it is or where it resides. So let's talk about people challenges. And I think if we're going to create a DevSecOps capability, we better understand what DevOps wants, and we better understand what SecOps wants, because somewhere we have to meet in the middle. And so one of the things I want to talk about a little bit is some of the benefits of DevOps and some of the challenges. Same thing on the security side, because if you understand them at their roots, you can start to think about, how do I effectively integrate security into this DevOps process?
So
let's talk
now's probably a good time to ask my question.
Sure, absolutely.
And you can weave it into your response. But I noticed in the article, and I was saving the question to now, they mentioned following the SDLC. And in my experience, very often companies either don't have an SDLC or they have one somewhere. I think somebody saw it once. They produce it for their annual PCI assessment. But from a people perspective, a lot of the developers, they're just doing what they've been told to do: write code, make something work, build something. The idea of an SDLC, and I've asked a lot of people that do DevOps or SecDevOps or DevSecOps or whatever you want to call it, and people kind of look at me funny when I mention the SDLC. So, is an SDLC still relevant, or is it evolved? What does it look like in today's world?
Yeah, the SDLC is evolving into really a CI/CD process, continuous integration, continuous deployment, what we kind of generically call DevOps. Mm-hmm. And it's not that the concepts of the SDLC have changed, that the definition of the SDLC has changed. The way we're delivering the software development lifecycle is shifting in the capabilities and how it's actually being done. Now, in the old days, an SDLC was thought of a very waterfall-based approach. You would, spend months identifying a set of requirements. Right. You'd spend months to code those requirements, and then you would spend, weeks and or months testing securing
But
deploying.
wait, we still need to spend time developing requirements. Let's not lose sight of that. Okay.
Agreed. But the cycle,
but it's done in minutes.
but the cycle that's happening is it's not. We don't spend months developing requirements. We're iterating through requirements on a very fast basis. It could be daily, it could be weekly, but we're iterating through requirements. We're reprioritizing requirements, and developers are developing code against those on a faster cycle. Where in the old waterfall approach, we had time to do our security assessment at the end of the process, and still be relevant. In DevOps or the continuous integration, continuous deployment pipelines, those frequencies are changing. They're so much faster. And so you're iterating through code way faster than you did before. So how do you bring that together? So having what you want in PCI, which is this fully documented, beautiful workflow of the software development lifecycle, doesn't really exist in these worlds. It's kind of iterative. It's constantly changing. We'll talk about some of the challenges for DevOps in this process is the tools that they're using, the number of automation steps are constantly changing and improving to get more acceleration on the deployment side.
Well, I tell my customers all the time that are struggling to come up with the document. I say, look, you're following a process, whether it's written down or not. You're taking steps. All we're looking for is something written down that says that the steps are there. My concern is if it's not written down in some way, shape, or form, so it's not being taught, so it's not being, there isn't a reference guide. Because of the much faster cycles, things get omitted and things get dropped, missed, or they don't know that they're supposed to be doing that. And very often that's a step that relates to security.
You still have to define whether you're doing a DevOps process, integrating Agile, whatever it is, you need to define that process for how you develop software. And that's independent of what methodology and whatever labels you give it in the back end, right? And I think from an auditing perspective, what you're looking for is in the different iterations, like, wait, in the previous one, you had a process that checked for something security related, right? It doesn't matter what tool you're using, but in the new process, you're skipping that step, to your point, Jeff, right? And we need to be able to notice differences.
Or I'm concerned that and at the end of the day, what PCI or what an SDLC from a security perspective is looking for is that security is thought of in every step, and something's done about it at every step. That's the end game.
It is, and that is the nirvana of DevSecOps. But very few organizations are actually there, and we'll get into it in a
Carry
little
on
bit.
then.
So we'll get why.
Tell us how we should be doing it.
So let's talk about the people challenge. So if I'm on the DevOps side, what's my benefit? I get agility. It means I can add new capabilities to an existing application pretty easily because now I can add those into my microservice architecture and do that pretty quickly. I get velocity, right? I can speed up deployments. I can go after new markets. I can make improvements. I can innovate because of this iterative process. I get a lot of velocity. I can also get a lot of optimization out of my code. I can decide that, if I'm cloud-based, for example, one of the great examples we used to talk about at Layered Insight was I will move my workloads to different regions of the world based on around the clock, right? So if I'm a global environment, during the U.S. hours, I'm going to bring up my instances in AWS to reduce latency in the U.S. regions. But when I'm off the clock here, but Asia's in full swing, I can switch those workloads over to Singapore or some other zone and reduce latency. So it gives me a lot of ability to optimize your cost structures. It gives you the ability to optimize performance across the board. So these are interesting reasons why DevOps is so popular and really is driving the way we deal with application development. But look, DevOps folks, I think we've done a good job over the years trying to educate developers for secure coding. But at the end of the day, the developers and the DevOps teams really aren't the security experts. Their lack of understanding with security is a challenge for them, right? They don't understand why DDoS protections and all these other things are important. Security folks know that. The developers themselves don't, primarily because they are given a set of business requirements from the business, and their job is to code that functionality. They're not really thinking about security. And so that's a challenge for them.
I think there's two elements to that. One, from a people perspective, and from developers specifically. One we're talking about, which is what they're building or not building into their code themselves. The other one, which I saw more frequently back in my pen testing days, was the practices, let's say, of the developers that don't necessarily follow corporate security guidelines.
Right.
To speak it, sort of at a
Right.
high level.
So how do you check for that?
So how do you
Right.
how do you-
Exactly.
how do you combat against that?
Yeah, exactly. And I'll tell you how not to do it in a second.
Okay.
The other thing is, look, DevOps teams are always looking at automating, which means they're always bringing in new tools into the environment. So the process, back to your SDLC conversation, it's not static. It's dynamic. They're constantly introducing new capabilities in to get that automation, to get that enhanced agility and getting code out. So this is a challenge. The other thing is, look, a lot of these early DevOps shops adopted certain technologies that may or may not still be around. The perfect example is, anybody who bought into Docker and Swarm are now re-architecting to Kubernetes because Kubernetes won the orchestration game, right? And so the early DevOps shops are definitely struggling with some technology choices and kind of iterating through that. On the security side, look, it's pretty easy, right? As security folks, we want the inventory of what is authorized and unauthorized software on our network. Right. It's like a typical 101 kind of, from a compliance perspective, from a security perspective, I need accurate inventory, what's authorized, what's unauthorized. We want the ability to validate compliance with our policies and regulations, back to the security and compliance conversation.
Yep.
And we need a way to assess, monitor, and remediate these applications in these new environments. That's what we as security folks want. But here's some things we struggle with. We're not used to this frequency.
Yep.
Back to my scanning example.
Yep.
We are changing applications. I think Etsy is one of the most aggressive cases I've seen, where every 7 minutes they're pushing to production. Think about that from a security speed perspective for a second, Jeff, right? That means they're making a change every 7 minutes. How are you going to stay up with security in that kind of environment with that frequency?
Right.
I mean, if we scan our networks once a month, we think we're good. I mean, every 7 minutes, so that's a challenge. Also, I think, security struggles a little bit with its changing role. Operations is owned by the development as part of this DevOps team. We're used to being on the operational side of the infrastructure. DevOps teams are spinning up their own networks. They're spinning up their own servers. They're spinning up their own orchestration and application infrastructure through code that we don't have visibility into. And so our role is moving away from an operational role in some respects, more to a governance kind of role. We have to think about that governance aspect in our changing role as security professionals.
But that's not exactly a new problem, because security teams, again, I'm dating myself, going back to more of my consulting, pen testing, security architecting type days, where the people that were attempting to do security were always discovering things that the web, most of the time it was web developers back in those days, were doing, setting up staging areas that were internet reachable, that were wide open, using stock install builds of the underlying OS, so on and so forth. And I don't know that was ever solved. It's just transcended into, new platforms, new architectures, new methodologies.
Exactly right. And, I might be more worried about my overall relationship with AWS from a security shared responsibility model than I am about, generating logs and managing my own SOC in some respects, right? Like I said, I think our role is changing a little bit in this environment, so we struggle with that. And the last one is, look, we've got a lot of legacy solutions that don't give us a lot of visibility and control in these new environments.
Right.
And so how do we get that back? That's a challenge for us as security professionals, right? So some of the people challenges.
Yep.
The process challenge gets really interesting for me, because if you think about how how we've traditionally tried to do this. Development goes out, they build their code. That becomes a container instance and gets deposited into a container registry. Okay. Now what we do is we've got this container ready to deploy in production, but we know security has to get involved. So security is the last step in the process. So now I say, hey, security team, here's this container. Can you guys go out and assess it for me? Mm-hmm. Now, 3 years ago, 2-3 years ago, this was pretty hard for the security teams. They're like, well, how do I assess this new thing called a container? What tools do I have? Which tools do I need? It takes them some time to do some research. They do their scans against this environment. And then, oh, by the way, they send back a bunch of findings back to the security or to the development team. And the developers are like, I got to push this code. I don't have time to fix your 300-page vulnerability report, right? We've seen this over and over and over again. Yep. And we've seen this in the application side. So what we've done is we've slowed down the process. What DevOps gives us is that speed and agility, and what security just did is they just took that speed away and that agility away, right? So how do we solve this? This is where this concept of how do I unify security into the CI/CD pipeline actually come together. And so I want to talk about some very specific checkpoints along the way where I think security can insert itself into the pipeline and provide valid security checks along the way.
Okay.
So,
and don't slow anything down.
Go. So let's start with the first step. I build a container instance. I go to my build system. I have the ability as part of that build to do a static analysis, a code analysis of that code being checked in. I can do it right there. I don't have to wait to do my static analysis at the end of the process. I can do it right now because that code just got compiled. Excuse me. It got sent into my build system. So why not do my code analysis as part of the actual build? This is where Rapid7's Jenkins plugin comes into play. It's where other people...
Jenkins is so like 2 weeks ago, Matt, though.
What's that?
That's my Jenkins joke. Oh. Jenkins is so 2 weeks ago.
It's so 2 weeks ago. It could be whatever the build system is. It can be plugged in right there. I can do my code analysis at that point in the process. And if something is wrong, I can let development know as part of the build. I don't have to wait until the end of the process to do that. It's a very valid step to do. Now, on Monday, we were talking about static scanners and some of the challenges with traditional SaaS tools in the industry. Is the old SaaS tools needed to see all the code to really do what it did well. And one of the challenges in a container-based, microservice-based architecture is the SaaS doesn't necessarily have all this code to analyze at once. It gets it in pieces. So simple things like IDE plugins for security spell checkers, basic SaaS issues, some basic fuzzing can all be done pretty much in this phase of the build process. I don't need to wait to do these things, and I can provide very quick response back to the developers as they're building their code that there's an issue and get it fixed, right? That just speeds things up because I don't have to wait till the end to fix it. The second,
we're still looking at source code and just the binaries.
Correct.
Not anything in runtime or X.
Nope.
What I would term the next step would be unit testing, right?
Yeah, and there is some level. Yeah, you can
using the app.
Yeah, exactly. So now I've checked that as part of the build process. I verify all that from a code analysis perspective. I now drop that container into my container registry. So now you have a very interesting opportunity. Now you have all the binaries assembled. You have all the interdependencies of the app in that container all sitting together in one spot. This is where software composition analysis really plays in, I think, is that next validation step.
Whoa. What's the difference between software composition analysis and code review?
So static code review is looking at the actual lines of code. Software composition analysis is looking at all the binaries and libraries embedded within that container image to see if there are dependencies that have vulnerabilities in them.
And you can even break that up into two parts. In fact, if you're using Git, it actually does that for you. When you check code into the version control like Git, it'll tell you if you're using Python libraries. This happened to me, right? Your Python libraries you're calling are outdated version because it's looking at my requirements file. Then it can look at your built container and go, hey, when you built this container, you're using an older version of a Linux package or have some other even configure or some vulnerability that's known inside of your container. So I look at this as a two-step process, right? There's the composition that I can check in my software repository in Git, or as an example, right? And then once the container, the environment is built, I can check the composition of the container to see if it contains.
I feel like there's an older term for that, and we have a new. That's very
SCA is what
term.
the analysts call it. It's
Right.
software composition analysis, and what it's
it's-
looking
it
for
was
is
like-
all
but it's
those dependencies.
Nothing
Yeah.
that's
Something
really
about
truly new, right?
I don't remember what the term was,
Yeah.
and I'm going back 30 some years to
Sure.
my DoD days.
Yeah.
But mapping the dependencies and the libraries
Could also be called
and-
your software bill of materials.
Yes.
Kind of what Alan talks about a
Yeah.
little bit. But it is understanding all those interdependencies. Because containers are based on Linux, there's a lot of old Linux libraries out there that are dependencies, and some of those libraries, the older ones, have a lot of vulnerabilities in them. Here's where you do your basic vulnerability checks. Part of that software composition analysis, a lot of great tools out there that do this for you, some free, some paid, but they're there. It's a great second check in the process. By having that information, I can now do a set of security and compliance enforcement validation from a policy perspective, right? Remember, as security folks, we want to make sure that it complies with certain policies and regulations. Here's where I can write a set of rules to say, look, I don't want any critical vulnerabilities. I don't want any GPL licensing. I don't want any of these other things in the
I don't
container.
want any Linux kernel privilege escalation vulnerabilities in my container.
Exactly. So you can validate, now that you've done the software composition now, so you can now apply a set of security and compliance rules against that to say, am I going to allow this thing to move forward or not?
Break the build or not.
Exactly.
Does it make sense in any way to use I'm putting it in terms that I understand, to use these building blocks that are somewhat standardized, I would think. Does it make sense to be doing some of these preliminary checks and security checks on the building blocks ahead of time?
You can to an extent. The problem is I don't think you can control all the building blocks because the developers are literally pulling down libraries and stuff from
It's the time
sources
and the
all
speed,
over,
and
right?
everything's being updated.
Your,
all
Yeah,
the
it's
your
time.
Docker file basically defines like the instructions on how to build my container, and it says go install this software. You don't necessarily know like which version or which library it may actually pull down until it's built.
Until it's built, and so now you need to validate it, get it against your rules. This is a second integration point. If it fails certain checks, you want to get that data back to the developers as quickly as possible.
Right.
You don't want to wait until the end of the process, say, oh, by the way, you have 7 critical vulnerabilities that you now need to go address. Because I'm part of the build process now, I can do this pretty quickly. Give oh yeah, wrong library, update the version, boom, passes the test, on it goes. So this removes the friction of security in this process because I'm giving them that feedback instantly in the overall process.
Gotcha.
So it passes those. This is where Layered Insight was unique. There are some other vendors out there as well, but the ability now to instrument the container image for both security and performance requirements. We've seen a lot in the APM market that does instrumentation. We've seen other instrumentation from a security perspective. But now that I have the container, I know it's passed. I can do some instrumentation here if I want to, both from a performance and a security perspective. This helps you in the runtime side later, where I can actively monitor that running container in production. Okay.
Yep.
Now I move this thing over into test and staging, back to unit testing, Paul. This is now where I start to spin these things up on the orchestrator itself. I start running through a set of tests, and I'm collecting data. If I've got my instrumentation in there, or if I've instrumented my orchestrator, Kubernetes in this particular case for most organizations, I can start to see what's going on at the container. I get a lot of behavior data out of these environments, so I can start to baseline what these container environments at runtime are actually
Sysdig
doing.
did a great job of presenting on Paul Security Weekly on this aspect.
Exactly.
I said
right?
because we're running short on time.
Yep. And so that allows you to do it. Then, obviously, through the testing cycle, we can provide that feedback. This stuff follows you into production. This allows you to do that runtime protection in production and continue to update your different rules that you're monitoring for in production. It also provides a ton of data, not only to the security teams, but to the development team, right? The DevOps teams get a lot of this instrumentation back, say, look, that process shouldn't have forked, or we shouldn't see this type of CPU or memory utilization. But also security can also look for a lot of potential issues as well. So these are some of the different points I would integrate security along the CI/CD pipeline and put organizations in a much better place to deal with security along the way instead of waiting till this thing's in production or in test to do all these various tests. Anyways, that was my shtick.
Cool.
Sweet. Well, with that, we'll take a short break, come back with our interview with the fine folks from Canada Security. Stay tuned.